You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. For previous episodes, visit thinkingcountry.com or find the podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud by searching for Meet the Farmers. Hello and welcome to episode 44 of Meet the Farmers, which is supported by the Mercer Foundation. For this episode, I'm in Oxfordshire and I headed to English Farm, which is managed by Silas Hedley-Lawrence. English Farm is focused on producing premium grass-fed beef from longhorn cattle. In Silas's previous position, he most recently looked after a herd on the Isle of Wight, and we got to know each other at Cirencester when we both did a postgrad course there a few years back, so it was really good to catch up with him. And he really is doing some innovative stuff in Oxfordshire, so it was good to hear all about that.
So we're about 240 acres, certified organic and PFLA as well. Longhorn came here winter 2016. They came from two dispersal sales, so, it's amalgamating two groups, a fairly old herd, but, they match perfectly well into the system we've got here on, our kind of rolling hills, grassland in the Chilterns. The idea is that Robert, the owner, he took the farm through organic certification. The neighbouring estate, which is actually Robert's family, they're also organic. So Robert really wanted, I think, to take the parcel that he has here and do something really great with that, which is why he invested in our new butchery unit, which was a custom-built unit which sits inside our cattle shed. We kind of kicked that off September time last year. So there was a couple of years with the cattle here, and then just at the end of last year we started putting things through the butchery. So very much at the kind of early stages of a new venture here.
Which might be an exciting time to come in, really.
It is. So I came here last June. I don't have any background in butchery. I don't have any background in food production or, direct sales or anything like that. So, and Robert doesn't really either. So it has been quite a steep learning curve, but it's been an exciting challenge, which the whole butchery aspect of what's going on here and, the PFLA message and the organic message and, they're trying to be as environmentally sustainable, regenerative, focusing on soil health, nutrient-dense food, and all of that that's involved with this system. That's kind of really what drew me into moving from where I was to doing what I'm doing here now.
I was going to say, you mentioned the PFLA, the Pasture Fed Livestock Association, which is something I don't think we have touched on the podcast yet, so we'll definitely delve into that a bit later. But yeah, tell me, so you're previously working on the Isle of Wight. What was it like to live on the island, and what were you doing there?
Quite charming, actually. It was very nice, especially in the spring, summer months. It was a great place to be. You're kind of in your own little world, and the island is its own kind of little satellite, if you like, and not an awful lot mattered that didn't go on off the island. It's a very kind of agricultural place. There was lots of really good farmers there. It was very geared up for walking tourists and things, so there were great footpaths, and it was a great place for people to come on holiday, and the farming blended in with the landscape. The main issue we had there was that there was no abattoir on the island. So we were producing Highland cattle and Highland cross cattle on about 1,000 acres of grassland on the southeast coast. All of the animals that we finished, we had a suckler herd. We obviously took the cubs on and we fatted them, and then we sold them direct to the abattoir. So that was quite a big challenge, not only for us, but on the whole island in general.
So listeners will have picked up your accent a bit. Tell me about life growing up and why you wanted to go into farming in the first place.
Well, I was actually born here, but all of my family are in New Zealand, so growing up over here and going to school over here, all of my experience of farming was the experience I had of my family farms in New Zealand, which is dairy farms that later diversified into kiwi fruit orchards as well. Yeah. Kind of on the northeast coast of the North Island. When I got into my teens, I started spending a lot more time out there, and just started off with kind of crashing motorbikes on the farm and making a mess and being a nuisance, really. But as I got a bit older, I started getting more involved in milking and farm maintenance, things like that. So that kind of kindled my enjoyment of being in agriculture. And it gave me quite a different perspective from if I'd grown up in a farming environment in the UK, because for me, I always saw cattle, out on grass all year round. It was very low input, relatively to here. You know, the idea of housing cattle in barns and feeding grain was very alien. So as I got a bit older, started working on jobs, farms in the UK, and seeing the difference in the systems and things. So I was always very interested in, you know, why can't we produce beef or dairy on grass only over here? Which is, you know, that's very much what I've decided to kind of focus on, and what I decided to read a lot about at uni when we were there, and the job that I took after uni, and obviously moving on to where I am now.
Yeah.
So it's a very different system and comparatively in general.
So let's talk about the production of your beef in particular. The ultimate question, I suppose, what makes a good steak for you?
We can definitely tell the difference in a grain finished carcass and chunk of meat to a grass finished or 100% grass fed. You know, you get very different fat content. The meat's darker, it's usually more tender. You get kind of a deeper, fuller flavour. And, you know, that's echoed in the, you know, the responses we get from people that buy our beef or try our beef at farmers markets. You know, we do little tasters and things. And usually once you can get someone engaged and they try a little bit of the steak that we've cooked at the market, and, you know, always they get that response as, oh, wow, this is, you know, it's the best beef I've ever tried, or this tastes so much different to the stuff we buy in the supermarket, whatever. You know, you really can tell the difference in that. So diet has a huge point. Obviously, you know, aging, we have the luxury of being able to age things as long as we want. We have our own chiller system, etc., which is great. And it also means we're not kind of pressured to kind of get rid of beef and sell it or have to freeze it, because we've kind of got it packed and sitting there ready to shift. You know, we can leave things aging longer if we want to. Aging isn't everything. We don't age much from the forequarter of the animal. We obviously take the rib off and age that a bit more, but a lot of that front end we get through quite quickly in the fillet. Good fat cover too. You know, I love taking what some people would call maybe overly fat animals. Mm-hmm. It gives an awesome insulation around the carcass. Mm-hmm. So dry ages really well. You know, you can kind of lose a bit on the outside from that thick cover of fat, but then everything in the middle, you know, you're not losing too much from drying out. So, have you found that learning about butchery and the butchery process has changed the way that you think of the production side? Yeah, I think so. I was a bit guilty when I came here that, you know, I knew your basic cow anatomy, but breaking it down muscle by muscle into cuts and things, and especially with butchery jargon where you've got like 5 different names for the same cuts, and even, you know, we got a small team of butchers, and you call one thing a word and the professional butcher doesn't know what you're talking about, just they know it by a different name. It seems a bit crazy that some of the carcass sizes and what, you know, the general industry is trying to achieve doesn't necessarily equate into good meat quality. We struggle to sell things like your top size and everything off the back end, so we don't want a huge back end on our animals. You know, Longhorns have this great kind of boxy chest, which is good. You know, we love that because, you know, we love to sell things like your flat iron and chuck iron Denver steaks, and obviously, you know, your nice long backs, you're getting more there on your sirloin and ribs. So yeah, I think it has. You know, I definitely don't think that big cattle or whatever equates into good quality.
Let's talk about Longhorns, especially. What are the benefits of keeping Longhorns?
Well, they're incredibly quiet, docile breed, which is nice when you're kind of managing cattle, usually on your own, and they've got a metre long horn on each side of their head. The wonderful cattle do amazingly well on grass. So, you know, we're finishing 2-year-olds at kind of R4 gradings at 24 months just on grass, and that's out wintering them as well. And, you know, last winter it was pretty difficult. We went into the winter with very little grass cover because of the lack of rain, and we weren't able to get a winter forage mix in either because of that. So, which was great. So we're still finishing animals through winter over Christmas and into February with fairly low inputs and everything else.
You mentioned R4 there. Something we haven't covered on the podcast is grading. So can you just talk through the Europe grid and the grading process and how that works?
Sure. So the letter, so you imagine like a, you know, right angle axis, you know, the kind of the Europe on the left, which is the conformation of the kind of the shape of the carcass. And then the numbers, you know, 1s to 5s with your plus and minuses is your kind of your fat cover. If you're selling direct to the abattoir, then you kind of got your green zone where you're going to get your most pence per kilo if you're hitting that green zone, which will, you know, range from, you know, maybe a U4 up to a, you know, an E, whatever. Yep. So R4 is usually in the middle of that. Yeah, it's just a good balance of a good amount of fat, not too lean, and it might get a bit tough when you're aging it, but not too fat that you're probably wasting a lot and having to chuck some in the bin. You kind of got too much fat cover.
And certainly with a grass-fed animal, how are you gauging that? How are you making sure that you get to the level that you want?
The animals we're finishing in winter were naturally a bit leaner. Luckily that we did have quite an old herd, so there were a few coal cows lurking around. They might not have gotten calf the year before, whatever. So they were pretty fat anyway, so those guys kind of helped ride us through that kind of leaner winter period. But I think if we could get like a more high energy, high protein forage mix in with like a hybrid rape and kale, which we're planning to do this year, then they should still be putting on good weight over the winter. And I think the key is now that because we're really into mob grazing and good grazing management, that cattle compared to how they were last year, they really accelerate like the weights, the gains they're getting in spring and early summer at the moment. As far as what I saw last year, we've come a long way in that as well.
We had some more terms there. What is mob grazing?
So mob grazing it's short grazing periods of intense stocking rates. So if you had a very large field, for example, and then you maybe dice that up with reels of electric fencing into small cells or sections, but how maybe like a chessboard would look, and then you'd put a densely packed group of cattle in that cell of grass for a short period of time, so maybe a day or half a day or 2 days, and then you move them on. And then they're not able to go back to that patch of grazing that they've just grazed. So that's key in giving the grass and the herbs and the clover and everything that they've just grazed a much longer rest period. So if you, for instance, my cattle have just worked through a 12 hectare field, if you just put them all in there for a month or whatever, they're more likely to come back and graze that regrowth, which means that you're going to overgraze plants. So they're going to be grazed down to 2-3 inches off the top of topsoil, and then their recovery period is much longer because they have to use energy resources out of their root reserves and systems like that. If the mob grazing example in that same 12 hectare field, by the time that they've gone through each cell periodically and they get to the top last cell, that first cell they grazed has now had 6 weeks or more of recovery period. So we've turned from a big field maybe lasting a month and then taking 2 months to recover until you can come back. By the time you got to the end of that, you could probably go back to cell 1 and start again. So, if over time you're essentially producing more grass, then you can potentially run more cattle. Or if you're a system like us where you've got your cattle outdoors all year round, it should mean that you've got easy to float that wave of the grazing into winter and out of spring.
Let's talk about the PFLA, the Pasture Fed Livestock Association that you're a part of. What is that, and why is it important for you to be part of it?
So the PFLA is a relatively new organisation who really focus on the importance of ruminants producing meat or milk from 100% grass and pasture-based diets. So you can't feed grain, concentrated foods, soya, so you're instantly eradicating the carbon footprint associated with that, ploughing fields, cultivating fields, transporting grains and foods, sometimes across the world or might be across the country. And it's very much a much more low input system where, that you're using that animal to do what it is evolved to do, which is process long fibrous food. And if you get the right breed in the right system, if you're doing a purebred continental breed, it's probably not the right breed for a pasture-based grass system. So you see a lot of PFLA producers, they're using native breeds, additional breeds that do fantastically well on that kind of pasture-based system. And it's also the environmental benefits of all of that. You're not only decreasing carbon footprint by stopping feeding grain, but with tools like mob grazing, you can improve soil health, you can increase organic matter. So I graze grass covers that might be a lot longer to what more intensive farmers might manage, and I leave a lot more behind. So I try and take no more than 50% of the grass. And because they're very densely stocked in this mob grazing system, what they haven't grazed is usually been flattened or trampled, and they've also, they've mucked and urinated in a very confined, dense area, which is why you also have to move them regularly so they're not kind of grazing in their own muck. But because of that, you're building organic matter much quicker than if you were, say, set stocking or just rotational grazing, but, with a very sparse stocking rate.
Do you think when most people are buying their meat, they're thinking about those elements? Or we were saying before we started recording, obviously there's the price factor for a lot of people. There are certain labels like organic status, which you have here, which is quite well understood. Is PFLA pasture fed, grass fed? Do you think that's well understood enough from your point of view?
No, it's definitely not. There's a massive divide, especially in this country, compared to, say, somewhere more like New Zealand, where, you know, farming is the primary industry. Lots of people, even if they don't work in farming, have got some kind of connection to farming through family or whatever. In the UK, that kind of relationship with, you know, the non-rural community and farmers is very much deteriorated in the last, say, 70, 80 years. So I don't think people are not everybody, but lots of pockets of the population aren't aware of different production systems. So when they go to the supermarket, they might not understand, or they might not be able to justify why they might pay more for something that's organic or something that's British compared to something that's been imported. But, you know, I think one of the challenges the PFLA has and British agriculture in general, especially kind of coming out of Brexit and potentially having to deal with cheaper imports, is getting a dialogue out there, whether it's through labelling or using tools like social media, of making people in general more aware of what different production systems mean, what that means for health of the animals, what it means for the health of the food, and actually the end game is how healthy that is for the person. You know, if you can eat better nutrient-dense food that's, you know, it's got health qualities, that doesn't necessarily have all the kind of detrimental health associations that, say, example, feedlot cattle in America would have on terms of health, then surely that would justify them wanting to pay more for British produce or PFLA produce or organic going ahead. But certainly at the moment, it's people out there that actively look for these products. You know, they're very conscious on what food they buy, and they're happy to pay that, usually at a premium, because a lot of people say in the PFLA, they're not usually big producers. You know, they're not churning out lots and lots of animals, so that, you know, they're having to charge a bit more for their produce.
Yeah. When you go to your farmers markets, what sort of chat are you having with people? What are people asking? What are people asking you about?
It's really interesting, actually, because, you know, we do a lot of the local markets, and we just started tapping into doing some London markets. We are really blessed where we are, that we are in quite a wealthy area.
Yeah, definitely. That's clear enough.
And you know, even if we drive an hour each way, we're still in a, you know, relatively wealthy and quite rural as well. So people in general are, you know, they're not so phased about potentially paying more for a product. But, you know, we still get the people that, when it comes down to it, they just want to taste it and they want to know how much it costs. And that's fine. There's always going to be that group of people, you know, in all consumer markets, which is why it's important to have choice and diversity and everything else. But, you know, when I start speaking to people about why I'm so passionate about what we're doing here and what other farmers like us are doing, or, you know, what they might be doing across the world with regenerative agriculture and everything else, and how that ties into more nutrient-dense food and just really the environmental impact that can have in a positive way, that really gets people's brains ticking.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can kind of see all these messages. You know, I don't kind of preach and bang the table, but, you know, you just kind of explain gently, like, why what we're doing is different, and actually farming has got potentially this really important role in the future in reversing climate change and regenerating land through systems like a PFLA system and organics, or, you know, mixed farms and using cover crops and incorporating livestock into arable rotations and all of these things. Then you can kind of see that a lot of the conceptions that a lot of people had of farming, that it's bad for the environment and it's bad for emissions and everything else, they kind of start seeing it in a different light. And a lot of people stand and talk to you for like 10-15 minutes because, you know, they actually never had that exposure before.
Okay.
But these messages to them seem very kind of interesting and new, which they're not necessarily new, but as I say, that dialogue has broken down.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because in my head, the customers who would be coming to you would actually, in some ways, they have that in their head already, but actually, so you're saying that it's actually by having that conversation with you, that's going to make them more likely to not necessarily buy. Hopefully they will buy more of your produce, but they might start looking elsewhere as well.
Yeah, definitely. You know, obviously, as I say, people come looking for us because they're after our produce, but we try and do lots of, you know, 3 or 4 farm events on the year, you know, just free farm walks and talks, a little barbecue, you know, and again with these markets and using social media. And people go away then, and they then start making more of a conscious effort to look for different foods in supermarkets or farmers markets or buying things online. The people like, organisations like the NFU and the PFLA, they can kind of write as many emails and manifestos as they want about how agriculture is going to change and do this for wildlife, but it all comes down to consumer habits. If people don't actually start changing how they're buying food, then farmers probably aren't going to produce it. But it's a tough task, and as I say, you've always got that section of society that they can't afford to maybe pay a bit more for better produce, or they don't really mind. But especially with things like veganism, I think a lot of people that get into things like veganism, which in my opinion is perfectly fine, go for that if that's what you want to do, but I think they're doing it out of a will and a want to do something positive, because they think by going plant-based diets they're helping to reduce carbon emissions, and they're helping in a good way, in an ethical way, to reduce their own carbon footprints and welfare. But I think a lot of it is a lot of people don't know the difference in systems. So buying local and organics and things like that, I think hopefully it's got a lot of potential going forward.
And with your New Zealand link, it's inevitable we were going to talk about subsidies at some point. Let's talk about when subsidies were removed in New Zealand back in the 1980s. Why did that happen in the first place? I'm not saying that you're an expert in this, but
yes, well,
what was the impact of that?
The 80s were before my time. I'm a 90s baby, so I will admit I pinged an email out to my uncle. I think it was in the middle of a yacht in the Pacific somewhere, so thankfully he got back with some good details. But it sounded like the basically New Zealand government couldn't afford to subsidise farming, and New Zealand farmers, as they do here, New Zealand the farmers always voted for the National Party, which is kind of the Conservative equivalent, and it actually took a Labour government to come in, and they kind of almost scrapped subsidies fairly quickly, almost overnight. And when they did that, they deregulated the financial markets and they floated the dollar. So in the short run, it was quite chaotic and incredibly stressful. Exchange rates went straight up and interest rates as well. So what happened was that a lot of farmers, if they had lots of debt, then they couldn't pay those debts. The farmers had devalued themselves. Lots of new entrants that might have had mortgages and things and farms got phased out. Lots of other businesses associated with the farming sector, they really struggled. Your livestock haulers, abattoirs, your local produce shops, because farmers weren't spending. Yep. So the whole wider industry really struggled as well. I know on our farm anyway, nearly all the staff were laid off, and it went back from my grandfather and uncle managing the farm with staff they basically went back to doing it all themselves. So obviously there's lots of unemployment and mental health issues, and I think there's quite a lot of suicides and things going off because everything for a lot of farmers just kind of really fell apart. But what happened is, on the plus side, it all of a sudden made farmers become very reactive to market forces. So they had to become very efficient, they had to become very innovative. So if something didn't make sense financially without those subsidies, then it didn't work and they didn't do it. So a lot of, say, sheep farmers, for example, so sheep was a very heavily subsidised part of agriculture before the subsidies came out. So a lot of them shifted back into dairy, out of sheep, because dairy was the least subsidised of the lot. So it kind of made the whole industry more efficient, and it pulled in good young innovative talent, because the people that couldn't really make it work, they went bust and they got phased out. So in the long run, it's worked out really well for the next 30-40 years since that happened. New Zealand export markets have been really strong, and farms have diversified. Things like the wine industry, horticulture, they're much more prevalent now than they were kind of pre-scrapping of the subsidies. So in the long run, I think it has been really beneficial. I think it's taught a lot of farmers in New Zealand a good lesson in how to be very efficient and producing produce that works on the export markets and not being reliant on subsidies. So I don't think subsidies in the UK will be completely scrapped, but obviously the whole basic payments pretty much looks like it's going to be phased out, and it's to be that whole public good provision, which I know that Robert Goodwill said, and DEFRA have said that they're not going to directly pay for improving the soil health over here. But what they are looking to pay for is public goods which inherently are related to soil health. So floods resilience, water retention, water quality, air quality. All these things are very hard to achieve if you're being paid for these without having a really good focus on your own soil health first and foremost. it's an interesting thing to see what will develop over here. I don't think it will pan out in any way the same way as it did in New Zealand. It's a very different structure.
Yeah.
Obviously over here agriculture isn't the major industry like it was in New Zealand, and then everything else, but it's going to be a very interesting topic to follow in the next kind of 10-15 years. But it sounded like in New Zealand it took a good kind of 10 years for that cycle to kind of cleanse itself and them to come out on the good side of those subsidies being scrapped. But I think since they got to that point, the industry as a whole is definitely much healthier.
Brilliant. Before we go outside, we're going to try the 1 minute soapbox. That's okay. I don't know whether you've heard this on previous episodes. So this gives guests 1 minute to talk about a subject of their choice, and this could be anything at all, farming or non-farming.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll keep it farming. So, it'll be really good in the future seeing. Great, I was at Groundswell the other week, and it was the first time I've been, but it was amazing how kind of busy it was and how, everyone was so eager to kind of talk to people and meet people and share information. And a lot of people were there that, they're not no-till and they're not organic or whatever else, but they're kind of interested in the dialogue. They want to know more about it. Okay. So, it'd be great to see more farmers going down that route in the future. I think incorporating cover crops and livestock as arable rotations is going to be a very important thing going forward, especially trying to meet these kind of, public good outcomes of subsidy payments. It'd be a fantastic opportunity to see new young entrants in the industry who can't afford to buy land, who can't afford to take a tenancy out. They can buy a herd and they can incorporate their herd into someone else's arable rotations. So, that could be a win-win situation for the farmer then, who's getting, improved soil health, increasing organic matter, soil nutrients and everything else, whilst, providing a window for new entrants to come in and get their foot in the door in an industry that's quite clogged up and hard to break into.
Yeah. That'll do. That's about 1 minute. That's very good. Should we go outside?
Yeah, that'd be great. So this field and this field here, these are the ones that we've really kind of intensively mob grazed for the last few years. We're running all of our kind of young stock and fat stock through these two fields. I usually set it up so that they're on a daily move or a move every other day. Yeah. And then, use the fencing and the water troughs just to kind of make that easier, and maybe only move the trough every other move or something like that. So once you've got the infrastructure there with the gear, you can make it actually work quite efficiently and quite quick.
Yeah. Clearly this trampling effect has quite a big impact. Describe what's going on there.
Well, you can see here, so they would have maybe been in this section about 4 days ago. And that's leaving good cover on the soil, like a kind of an armour if you like. So if you were to put your hand underneath that, it's probably going to be a couple of degrees cooler than it is if I'd graze that right down tight to the topsoil. So when it does rain, this thick, dense residual that's been flattened and trampled, that's going to hold a lot of that moisture, get that down into the soil. If we went and now had like a long-term drought, then we're not going to be losing moisture through evaporation anywhere near at the same rate than if we'd kind of graze this much tighter. But you can see, we'll get up to the cattle now, you can see kind of how good condition they are from this kind of grazing. And this is actually now, so the section they're in now, this is me in the final section of my first rotation.
Right.
Since, we've got the spring grass. So we're now in mid-July, and it's taken us from March, April, May, June into mid-July until I've completed one rotation on this part of the farm.
So how many have you got on this patch?
So we've got 43 in here. This is a mixture of yearlings, 2-year-olds. We've got the odd coal cow. A couple of the coal cows have a calf at foot. And there's 1 or 2 3-year-olds as well.
Yeah, stunning.
Which are actually new additions. But you can see, they've all got rumens that are full. They're all looking pretty fat and wobbly. If I compare to last year, actually these yearlings are weaned very late anyway, kind of 11 months. And by then they're not reliant on milk. They've got pretty hefty horns, and anyway, so the cows usually booch them off.
I was going to say, for anyone who hasn't seen a longhorn in the flesh, Google it now and have a look what they look like, because they're a pretty special beast, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, they're amazing cattle. They're just so well on this grass. My problem actually is especially with the cows, is keeping them skinny going into calving. Even just putting them on a kind of hay-only diet over the winter, they kind of do so well in the spring and summer that sometimes they're a bit too fat. But these young ones here, I've actually this year, part of the reason why I'm trying to kind of get heifers especially going into calving in a kind of a bit more of a leaner condition, I put some yearlings on to the bull this year, which generally I don't think is a done thing with longhorns. Okay. I did have a phone call with the breed secretary to see what other people have been doing, but usually they go on at 2 and calve at 3. But where we are, with grass is so great, and especially with the mob grazing, they've always got so much grass to graze on. They're just putting weight on all the time, really. So the yearlings this year look fantastic compared to how they did last year anyway. Mm-hmm. What was really surprising actually is how quick this field and the next door field was in the recovery period coming out of that drought. So coming into early September is when we first got a decent bit of rain. So I tried to shut up about half the farm over autumn to get as much grass cover going into winter as I could. And so this field and the neighbour field, the amount of grass that came back in that 4-week period, that the fields that were mob grazed, was astonishing more than the fields that I didn't properly mob graze in that spring and summer and the year before that, before I started, that the previous manager was doing as well. In here we've got our new bull, for 18 months, maybe a little bit older, but 18 months, and he's in with a group of heifers, some homegrown. Our first heifers coming through as replacements with our own ear tag prefix, which is exciting. And there's a handful from another organic PFLA longhorn producer up in Shrewsbury, which I brought down in March. So we're a bit understocked at the moment, so trying to get that balance to be able to get animals through the butchery and increase stocking rate is quite difficult, but I think after this last purchase of heifers, that'll be it now. We'll become a close herd apart from replacing breeding bulls.
As you mentioned, so it's about 2 animals going through the butchery a month?
Yeah, about that. We're flexible with it. If it doesn't quite, if demand exceeding what we can produce, then I'll take an extra animal. Or things are getting a bit quieter, then I might slow it down. And obviously you've kind of got your busy periods, Christmas, Easter, school holidays, things like that. So, and then obviously in January, February, it's a bit more quiet. So hopefully, a year or 2 down the line, we'll be doing maybe 3 animals a month, which I think is where we want to be at. I think that's financially the goal. Yep. I think it's quite doable as well. It's not kind of overloading too much. And I think the main challenge with anyone doing something similar to what we're doing, or people getting doing beef box schemes and getting things back from their butcher or abattoir, is trying to find a market to shift some of those less kind of desirable or popular cuts. So if my longhorns consisted of ribeye and sirloin and fillet and not anything else, then life would be great. But it's shifting the things like the top side that a little bit more difficult. We've just found a good market for our silver sides, we're pairing up with a local charcuterie firm. Yep. So we might kind of just give them the beef and then split the batch of Brazolas or whatever 50-50, which works quite well for us. But we're getting there. We've got some good little deals with some, one of the local pubs takes a lot of mince for us, so they make kind of English farm longhorn burgers, and so that's part of the parcel of starting a new venture, especially when you don't really have any experience in it. It's just finding where you fit in the market and trying different things out and making it work.
How often do you get off the farm?
Well, the last 6 months with calving and then having to be here every day in winter to feed and stuff, not a huge amount, but it's a great place to be where we are. So there's a lot going on in the local area, and the great thing with our system is on a Friday you can just set the fences up, especially in summer and spring, just to get you through the weekend, and all you have to do is just pop your head over the hedge and just make sure everything's there, and the water trough hasn't been knocked over and whatever. So you can get off and do what you want on the weekend, which is great. It's still part of that it's all about that, going back to that flexibility. Make the system work for you, which is great, and if you're having to feed and bed out cattle indoors every morning and every afternoon, then that really kind of takes that flexibility away. So
don't be a slave to the system.
The cattle look after themselves. They don't need me here to kind of tell them what to do and where to graze, and as long as I'm not letting them overgraze things. I don't like keeping them in the same place longer than 4 days. This is quite a big area for the 20 cattle that are in here. But if I do 4 days in this section of the field and move them over and do 4 days, if I'm doing that over 10 different sections across 5 different fields, then that's quite a long recovery period.
You've been here about a year. What's the main thing that you've learned so far?
Maybe how little I knew before.
Okay.
Even though I thought I might have known quite a lot, and actually how much more I've still got to figure out and learn, and how much more you can improve, Yeah, you could do this job for the next 20 years, and I think you can always find that room for improvement.
Yeah.
And it's actually thinking completely different. Like, I always used to think about beef production and grass production, and then now I've kind of completely shifted into thinking about soil health, pasture diversity, and everything else, and actually shifting from the kind of the beef production way of thinking. How I need to, it's about getting the cattle. It's all about the cattle, the beef. But if you focus on actually the soil and the pasture, then everything else falls into place and actually turns out better for it than forgetting about the soil, forgetting about the pasture health and everything else.
Huge thanks to Silas for showing me around English Farm back in July. You can find out more at englishfarm.net. For the next couple of episodes, we're turning towards open farms, and in the next episode, I'll be speaking to Sally and Sian Bendel at Hollow Trees Farm in Suffolk. In the meantime, you can catch all previous episodes at thinkingcountry.com and selected episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes and eatfarmnow.com. Huge thanks to the Mercer Foundation for supporting this and other episodes, and I look forward to you joining me next time.